Welcome back to our news bulletin. We start from the US President Donald Trump, who says he will meet Taliban leaders in the near future. The statement comes after Washington signed a historic peace deal with the group on Saturday in Doha to end the Afghan war. Speaking at the White House, Trump said the war in Afghanistan will be over if Taliban fulfill commitments made in the agreement. The US President said everyone is tired of war. He said the United States can't be the policeman for the world.
Had tremendous success in Afghanistan in the killing of terrorists, but it's time, after all these years, to go and to bring our people back home.
Meanwhile, the Taliban have started diplomatic outreach by meeting envoys from Turkey, Russia, Indonesia and Norway in Doha. Moving on, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani says he has not committed to releasing 5,000 Taliban prisoners. The prisoner release is a pivotal prong of the peace deal signed between the US and the Taliban in Doha yesterday. At a press conference in Kabul, Ghani said it can be included in intra-Afghan talks agenda, but cannot be a precondition for dialogue. The president said releasing prisoners is not in the authority of the US, rather it is a decision for the Afghan government to make. Criticizing the peace deal, Ghani said an agreement signed behind the closed doors will have basic problems in its implementation. Ghani also spoke about the team which will attend intra-Afghan negotiations in Doha with the Taliban on March 10th. He said delegation's authority is limited as the ultimate decision maker is either Parliament, the Grand Council or a referendum. Meanwhile, Afghanistan has been in a state of war for decades. Now, after the signing of a peace deal between the US and the Taliban, many Afghans consider it as an important step towards sustainable peace. Let's take a look at their reaction to the development in this report.
A landmark peace deal between the US and Taliban has been signed in Doha, raising hopes for a sustainable intra-Afghan dialogue. This could result in an end to the deadly 19-year-old conflict. Many Afghans hope the development will bring peace to the country.
I think it was a very important step towards peace and stability in Afghanistan, and we have to be optimistic towards the next step.
We are delighted because of the peace process between the US and Taliban, which resulted after 18 months today.
The Afghan president's spokesperson Sadiq Siddiqui says the peace process is conditional and the Taliban will have to abandon violence.
So the agreement with the Taliban is based on conditions. The important condition is for the Taliban to abandon violence and they enter into a peace process in which it can guarantee a sustainable peace. If the Taliban does not abide by those conditions, of course, the Afghan government and the security forces we are all ready to defend this country.
Experts say the US-Taliban deal is a first milestone in the Afghan peace process.
The most important aspect of this agreement is that it's the first concrete milestone in an Afghan peace process. There have been efforts over a decade now to try to get a peace process launched, and this is the first tangible outcome of those efforts. Now, whether it actually sticks and whether it produces actual peace in Afghanistan remains to be seen.
NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has also heralded the agreement as an important step towards lasting peace.
India has imposed a curfew in some areas of northeast Meghalaya state after 3 people were killed in clashes over the new Citizenship Act. Since December 11, 70 people have lost their lives in nationwide protests against the discriminatory law. Clashes broke out between 2 groups on Friday during a meeting on the Citizenship Amendment Act in East Khasi Hills district. Meanwhile, the Indian government has ordered a Polish student from Jadavpur University to leave the country within 15 days for participating in the protests. Indian police have also registered 22 FIRs against anti-CAA protesters in Aligarh district of Uttar Pradesh state. The northern states officials have issued 500 notices to the protesters since February 23rd. Hundreds of Indian Americans and British Indians have held protests against the mob violence targeting Muslims in New Delhi. 42 people, mostly Muslims, have been killed in clashes during protests against the controversial Citizenship Act. In the U.S., demonstrators held rallies in New York, Chicago, and Atlanta, raising anti-Modi and anti-CAA slogans. Talking to media in New York, the marchers spoke of BJP's fascist ideologies that target lower caste Hindus and religious minorities. In London, the protesters asked the UK government to issue a strong condemnation of Modi government for sponsoring anti-Muslim riots. In the Delhi riots, 92 houses, 57 shops, 500 vehicles, 2 schools, 4 factories and 4 religious places were burned down by Hindu extremists. Indian troops have martyred 10 Kashmiri civilians during the month of February. In January, the Indian forces martyred 21 civilians in the occupied valley. In a report, the Kashmiri media said 3 were martyred in a fake encounter or in custody of the troops. It said 7 others were martyred during cordon and search operations across the valley last month. It said 30 people have been critically injured due to use of brute force and firing of tear gas shells by the security personnel. The valley is reeling under Indian curfew and clampdown for the last 210 days. Mohiuddin Yassin has been sworn in as Malaysia's new Prime Minister a week after Mahathir Mohamad stepped down. The 72-year-old former Interior Minister is the 8th Premier of the Southeast Asian nation. He was sworn in at a palace ceremony in front of King Abdullah. Reacting to the development, Mahathir promised to seek a vote in Parliament to challenge Mohiuddin's support. Talking to media in Kuala Lumpur, Mahathir said Mohiuddin did not have support from most of the country's 222 MPs.
This is a very strange thing because the result of the 14th election should be that the winners form the government. Here we are going to see from the same election, the losers will form the government. The winners will be in the opposition.
Hundreds of protesters, some armed with petrol bombs, have rallied in Hong Kong to mark 6 months of police crackdown on demonstrations. Police used tear gas to disperse protesters who gathered in and around Mong Kok district at the Prince Edward subway station. Demonstrators chanted slogans of liberation and revolution and called for police force to be disbanded. In a statement, the police said they used minimum necessary force for dispersal and arrest operations. The clashes now are among the most violent ones after a period of relative calm following intense anti-government protests that broke out in June last year. Earlier this week, publishing tycoon Jimmy Lai's arrest for financing protests brought the movement back into the spotlight. In Venezuela, opposition leader Juan Guaido has escaped an assassination attempt after a masked gunman opened fire during a march in Barquisimeto city. Guaido's media office says the opposition leader's vehicle was hit by 9 bullets. The opposition has blamed pro-government vigilantes known as Colectivo, which support President Nicolas Maduro, for the attack. City's former mayor and opposition activists said the marchers were ambushed by about 200 Colectivo members and forces loyal to Maduro. Guaido has called on his supporters to show strength as a 16-year-old demonstrator was injured and several others roughed up.
The dictatorship could have killed me today. They shot, fired firearms near us, pointed me out, but that is not going to push us back, nor the persecution of my family members, nor politically prosecute us. For us, the limit is the physical limit. We have put our lives at the service of this cause.
In the U.S., former Vice President Joe Biden has won the South Carolina primary, reviving his flagging campaign for the Democratic presidential nomination. Biden's triumph has ended rival Bernie Sanders' winning streak of Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada. The race now pivots immediately to a new phase when 14 Super Tuesday states take the campaign nationwide early next week. Within 99% of the ballots counted in South Carolina, Biden has 48.5% of the vote. Sanders is next with around 20%, followed by billionaire activist Tom Steyer with 11%. Biden celebrated his victory, saying he will defeat President Donald Trump if nominated by the Democrats. Washington's governor has declared a state of emergency after the U.S. Capitol registered its first death by the new coronavirus. More than 60 people are sick and are being tested for the virus. Meanwhile, Pakistan's embassy in Kabul said Pak-Afghan border will be closed from tomorrow for 7 days to stop the spread of coronavirus. This report has details.
While China appears to have gotten a grip over the new coronavirus outbreak, the fatal disease is now ringing alarm bells in the other parts of the world. US health officials say the growing number of infected people who have not visited an affected area is extremely worrisome. But President Donald Trump insists there is no reason for the public to panic.
But we're doing really well, very, very professionally handled. Our country is prepared for any circumstance. We hope it's not going to be a major circumstance. It'll be a smaller circumstance, but whatever the circumstance is, we're prepared. And I'd like to just ask and caution that the media, we would respectfully ask the media and politicians and everybody else involved not do anything to incite a panic, because there's no reason to panic at all.
After the US and Australia, Thailand has also reported its first death from coronavirus. The number of coronavirus 19 cases in Italy have also exceeded 1,000, with the death toll rising from 8 to 29 in the past 24 hours.
Persone contagiate.
At the moment, we have 1,049 people infected, 29 dead, and a total of 50 recoveries. Of those 1,049 people infected, 52% are housebound, people who have no symptoms or symptoms so mild that they don't need hospitalization.
È in isolamento.
Italy's health authorities say half of those tested positive show few to no symptoms. Meanwhile, Qatar has reported its first case of the novel coronavirus.
New coronavirus has rattled the global economy as the virus continues to spread across the continents. Investors are running for the hills as fears of the economic slowdown and a possible recession loom. This report has more.
Disruptions to international travel and supply chains, school closures, and cancellation of major events have blackened the outlook for the world economy. Equities from the United States to Europe and Asia have recorded their worst week since the 2008 global financial crisis. S&P Dow Jones indices note global markets have lost $6 trillion in value just this week. But President Donald Trump says the markets will recover even after the U.S. markets crashed following the pandemic fears.
The markets will all come back. The markets are very strong. The consumer is unbelievably strong. The companies are very strong. We have one problem. We have to get this problem brought into focus, and it is right now. I think our professionals are doing a great job. I'm not thinking in terms. Well, it's certainly not a good situation.
Economists say a technical recession is imminent.
As cynical as it might sound, the markets are infected. There's this uncertainty about what the virus will do next. Will there be a pandemic, and will economic activities be dramatically affected? What's clear is that we will see a technical recession in the first and second quarter in several countries, including Germany. That's not good for shares, but above all, the uncertainty is poisonous for stock markets. We don't know how things will develop.
Brent crude oil recorded its biggest weekly decline in 4 years due to the dipping global demand, causing rise in the surplus of crude supply on the market.
Iran's President Hassan Rouhani has discussed the crisis in Syria with Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan and Russia's Vladimir Putin. He also proposed to host a trilateral meeting in Tehran. Tensions surged between Ankara and Moscow after 34 Turkish soldiers died in an airstrike in Syria on Friday. Talking with Putin, Rouhani said the Astana peace process must be implemented at the earliest to restore peace in the region. Rouhani said Idlib's situation should not be allowed to turn into a pretext for US interference in Syria. Meanwhile, in a telephone call with Erdogan, Rouhani said civilians should be protected and terrorists eliminated in Idlib. The president stressed the importance of cooperation among Iran, Turkey and Russia to resolve the Syria conflict. Tajikistan is voting in the parliamentary polls, marking its first balloting since the Supreme Court banned the main opposition group in 2015. President Emomali Rahmo's ruling party is expected to sweep the polls as only one critical party is taking part in today's elections. The Central Election Commission said 241 candidates have been registered to participate. The sole opposition party competing for the ballot, the Social Democratic Party of Tajikistan, has never entered parliament before. President Rahman's People's Democratic Party of Tajikistan currently dominates the chamber, holding 51 seats out of 63. At least 50% of all voters must cast their ballots for the election today to be considered valid. If the turnout is less than 50%, a new election will be called. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back to our news bulletin. Slovakia's opposition Ordinary People Party has taken a lead in parliamentary elections with the results of over 96% of districts announced. The party, led by anti-corruption campaigner Igor Matovic, has garnered a quarter of votes so far. The ruling centre-left Smer SD party, which has dominated Slovak politics for a decade, is second with 18.5% votes. The vote was dominated by public anger over the murder of an investigative journalist and his fiancée in 2018. The shooting of Jan Kuciak and Martina Kurzba shocked the nation and toppled Prime Minister Robert Fico. But his Smer SD, the party remained in office. Thousands of people gathered in Moscow to mark 5 years since the murder of prominent Kremlin critic Boris Nemtsov. Organizers said the march is also a protest against planned changes to Russia's constitution. It is the first major demonstration organized by Russia's political opposition since President Vladimir Putin proposed changes to the constitution. The proposals are widely seen as a means to allow Putin to extend his grip on power after leaving the presidency. It will be put to a national vote on April 22nd. Over 22,000 people rallied in a square around 2 kilometers from the Kremlin. Demonstrators carried photos of Nemtsov and protesters reading "No to Eternal Putin." The UK and EU are set to begin their post-Brexit trade negotiations in Brussels tomorrow to finalize a deal before the end of the transition period. London and Brussels have already unveiled their draft documents for Brexit negotiations. The UK and EU have until June to agree a trade deal, which has to be finalized by September. They will hold talks on a range of areas, from fishing and financial services, as well as controversial level playing field rules for the UK. London says it is not obligated to align any of its laws with that of the EU and its institutions, including the Court of Justice. Ahead of negotiations, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has threatened a no deal if sufficient progress is not made by June. Earlier this week, the bloc said talks on post-Brexit ties will be very hard and could fail if London does not sort out the Irish border issue. The French government says it will push President Emmanuel Macron's contested pension reform through Parliament by decree. This will avoid the need for a vote after the opposition filed more than 40,000 amendments to the draft law. The reform has prompted weeks of public sector strikes and protests before opponents of the legislation took the battle to the Parliament. Macron loyalists branded the mountain of amendments a cynical ploy to stall the pension bill's passage through Parliament. The reform aims to merge 42 sector-specific pension regimes into a single points-based system. The French government says it will be more transparent while also ensuring a more sound financial footing as the population ages. Turkey says it wants the US to send Patriot missiles for backup in Syria's northwestern province of Idlib. Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu made the comment to reporters in Doha after a meeting with US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He said Turkey and Russia are working for a lasting and binding ceasefire in Idlib. Attacks by Syrian government forces killed 55 Turkish soldiers this month in northwestern Syria. President Tayyip Erdogan has threatened to push back Syrian forces if they do not pull back to predetermined lines. Cavusoglu said the Idlib issue can only be settled in a meeting between Erdogan and Russian President Vladimir Putin.
I've been working with Russia actually for a lasting and binding ceasefire this time in Idlib. And yesterday afternoon, upon their request, our delegation met once again in Ankara. But it seems that this issue can be settled only at the meeting between President Erdogan and Putin.
Turkey says over 47,000 migrants have departed to Europe via its northwestern border province of Edirne. This comes after President Tayyip Erdogan announced Turkey has opened the doors to Europe for migrants fleeing war-torn Syria. In a tweet, Turkish Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu confirmed the increasing number of migrants crossing the border to Europe. Meanwhile, Greece has pushed back 4,000 migrants entering the country. Police fired tear gas tube at stone-throwing migrants as they tried to cross the border. The government spokesperson Stelios Petses said Greece withstood and organized an illegal attempt of border violation. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu hit back, saying Greece lectures on international law while shamelessly throwing tear gas bombs on innocents. The Berlin International Film Festival has drawn to a close with an Iranian filmmaker winning the Golden Bear. From Hillary Clinton to film industry's mega giants, the evening was full of stars and surprises. More in this report.
The 70th annual event kicked off in Berlin on 20th February with a gala and was followed by the world premiere of the film My Salinger Year. Mohammad Rasool's film There Is No Evil was awarded the Golden Bear. Rasulov is currently banned from leaving Iran for participation in social and political activities. The director's daughter, Baran Rasulov, who also stars in the movie, accepted the award on her father's behalf.
Thank you so much. Obviously, I'm very, very overwhelmed and happy about this award. And at the same time, I'm very sad because this is for a filmmaker who couldn't be here tonight. And I think I can say on behalf of everybody on the team that this is for him.
The Silver Bear for the Best Director went to South Korea's Hong Sang-soo for his soul-set drama, The Woman Who Ran. American writer-director Eliza Hittman won the Silver Bear Grand Jury Prize for Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. The film is based on a story of two teenagers from the rural U.S. who traveled to New York for the abortion.
For approaching a very complicated subject with maturity far belying their years.
Meanwhile, Paula Bear of Undine got Silver Bear for Best Actress. Silver Bear for Best Actor went to Elio Germano for the movie Hidden Away.
Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.